Chapter 39. Christy ran over slowly, and when she saw Siddle beside Hannibal, she couldn't hide her surprise. So the professor and Miss Christian know each other. After knowing that Hannibal and Siddle had known each other for a long time, the beautiful young girl's attitude towards Siddle immediately changed. If before she was polite on the surface, now there was a bit more genuine intimacy. This intimacy probably stemmed from her respect for Hannibal. Siddle could see the unconcealed respect and affection on Christie's face. At this time, Mason had been thrown into the back seat of the car by Hannibal. The man's body was still covered with moss and stagnant water, looking a bit disheveled, lying unconscious on the seat. Christie didn't even bother to look at him, but kindly handed Hannibal a wet towel. "Professor, do you need to go wash your hands?" Siddle. The scene before her eyes was exactly like the scene of a fan chasing an idol. Hannibal naturally took the wet towel, elegantly smiling gently at Christie. "Thank you." Before that, Hannibal had told the headmistress, "This place is too remote, the road is steep and there is only one way up the mountain. Why don't I take Mr. Verger first? If we meet an ambulance halfway, then Mr. Verger can be treated sooner." The headmistress thought for a moment, agreeing that this was also a good solution, so the few staff members in the orphanage had no objections. However, the story of Mason coming here to do charity work, then wandering around and collapsing had spread throughout the orphanage. Even the children were spreading the story. At first, it seemed like Hannibal was going to stuff Mason into his car, but when he saw the man's entire body covered in mud and moss, he suddenly stopped what he was doing, his face expressionless as he thought for a few seconds, then calmly opened Mason's car door. The key was on Mason's belt. When Siddle followed Hannibal into the car, sat in the passenger seat and fastened her seatbelt, she overheard Christie complaining softly. "Dear Verger, you're so stupid." She sighed, and couldn't help but cling to the car window with regret. "Professor, ever since you left the University of Massachusetts, we've all missed you so much. It was so hard to meet you here, but you have to leave, and I don't know when I'll have the chance to meet you again. All because of this hateful and stupid Mr. Mason Verger." The young and beautiful Christie thought angrily. Although she didn't say what she was thinking, it was so obvious that even Siddle could easily see it in her eyes. Siddle. She belatedly discovered that Hannibal's fate seemed to be better than expected. Could it be that they all didn't feel that this man was actually very scary? However, Siddle, who was currently being protected by Hannibal, could only remain silent. Although Christie was extremely reluctant, she was easily appeased by Hannibal's few words. After saying goodbye to everyone in the orphanage, the car that was suspected of carrying a corpse finally started. As the car drove on the mountain road, Siddle occasionally turned her head to look at Mason's motionless body in the back seat. She mentally calculated the time since Mason had fainted, and couldn't help but ask, "Doctor, is he really not dead yet? Are you still worried about his life?" Hannibal smiled faintly and glanced at her. "When you hit him, I didn't see you being gentler." Siddle waved her hand. "No, I mean, we still have to take him to the hospital later. If the car was driving halfway and the person was dead, wouldn't that be like walking into a trap? Why don't we quickly find a place to bury him?" "Wait, why did it suddenly turn into a murder and burying?" Hannibal chuckled and said, "Why do we have to take him to the hospital?" Siddle was terrified. Could it be that Hannibal had planned this all along? But before she could finish imagining, she heard Hannibal say, "Don't worry, little biscuit. The place you hit didn't hurt his brain." He turned the steering wheel and said softly, "It's just a deformed skull, it's not a big deal, don't worry." Instead of saying that he was knocked unconscious by me, it should be said that he was so scared that he fainted. Siddle understood. So Mason was still unconscious mainly because of fear. Siddle, who was always worried that she might have accidentally killed someone. She glared at the corpse lying in the back seat with disdain, snorting in disdain. What a waste. However, Siddle suddenly remembered another problem. "Doctor, didn't you study psychology? How do you know the human body so well?" She understood so well that she could accurately judge the condition of Mason's injuries with just 2 touches. Hannibal tilted his head, as if not surprised by her questioning. I studied at a medical school in Paris. I was a bit poor at the time, so I received a scholarship to study and work at the school. The price was that I had to prepare bodies for anatomy class outside of class. Do you want to guess how many human brains I've dissected over the years? He asked, smiling. Siddle was silent. After a moment, she replied blandly, never mind. She was wrong, she shouldn't have doubted Hannibal's expertise. Although dissection skills sounded interesting. But discussing anatomy in front of this man always made her feel uncomfortable to the core. All right, Hannibal seemed to know the answer, sighing with some regret. Let Mason lie down on the bed and sleep for a while, he will wake up. Then, can you tell me why he offended you? Hannibal smiled, revealing a faint dimple on one side of his face. He looked at the road ahead, his voice seemed to be a little indulgent, to the point where you had to pull out a crowbar. It's nothing. Siddle remembered what Mason had done and couldn't help but frown in disgust. He's just a disgusting violent maniac, and unfortunately your friend is his family member. What surprised Siddle was that Hannibal pondered for a long time before uttering a name, Margot. Siddle, do you know her? Yeah, Hannibal narrowed his eyes slightly, as if recalling, I met her twice a few years ago, and I was quite impressed. She's a determined child. He rarely gave her a compliment. Hannibal couldn't hear his attitude towards Margot from what he said, so Siddle couldn't help but feel nervous, fearing that he was also interested in Margot. Although there was no evidence, Siddle's intuition told her that being noticed by Hannibal didn't seem to be a good thing. But not letting her continue thinking, Hannibal asked again, so now you've decided. What should I do? Siddle regained her composure and replied, first, take Mason back to Muskrat Manor. After speaking, she lowered her head and took out her cell phone to send a text message to Janet. When Hannibal drove into Muskrat Manor, he was stopped by the gatekeeper, but after he showed his work card, he passed smoothly. Because the car had anti-peeping glass, no one saw Mason in the back seat the whole way. Until the car stopped in front of the castle, Siddle got out of the car and saw Margot waiting in the lobby. Siddle, she worriedly walked forward. Her brown eyes accidentally glanced at the handsome man in a windbreaker next to Siddle, along with Mason who was lying dying in the car after the man opened the back door. The little girl was momentarily stunned, her tongue twisted, and she stammered, You wouldn't have to go to this extent, still. Killing someone, why did you bring the corpse back? Siddle, you misunderstood. She caught a glimpse of the housekeeper rushing over, and the family doctor was waiting. Hannibal was already dealing with them. Siddle leisurely pulled Margot's hand upstairs. Your brother and I went to volunteer at the orphanage, but he didn't listen to instructions and ran into a bunker from World War II, and even slipped and fell in there. I don't know if he'll be okay when he wakes up. Margot, really? The girl looked at Siddle with some doubt, clearly seeing a wet patch of moss on her arm. Siddle calmly continued, Fortunately, I found Mason. If I hadn't appeared in time, he would have died there. You should thank me for saving your brother. She held Margot's hand tightly, winking gently at her a few times. Margot understood, her brown eyes filled with sincere emotion. Thank you for saving him, Siddle. It's nothing, who told you he was your brother? Siddle accepted the thanks without feeling guilty. When she left Margot's room, it was almost dark. Siddle and Margot said goodbye to each other. They were supposed to be kept at Muskrat Manor, but since it was late, and Hannibal and Siddle were the benefactors who brought Mason back, the butler made an exception and let the two of them take a Mustang from the garage after they finished registering. Siddle got in the car, but she still had to go somewhere else. When she was in Margot's room, Siddle suggested that she could take her away now, because she was worried that Mason might be angry with Margot when he woke up. But Margot refused her. Don't worry about me, the petite girl stood in the sunset, silently looking back at her. Isn't what you want to do not finished yet? For example, put him in jail. I think I can help you a little. I think I can do something too. In the end, Siddle still left alone. Margot stood in front of the second-floor window, quietly watching Siddle's figure gradually move away with a calm expression. After Siddle was taken to her destination by Hannibal, she said goodbye to the doctor. "Thank you very much for your help." Her deep blue eyes were very sincere and earnest, as if she was sincerely thanking him. "Good people will be rewarded." After saying that, she took 2 steps back, looking as if she was ready to leave quietly without hiding it. "Hannibal." He rubbed his forehead, helplessly saying, "Me too." This was still a wolf-hearted little cookie, taking advantage of someone and quickly abandoning them. Siddle turned and walked into an alley, not seeing Hannibal leaning against the car with his eyes gradually darkening. He lowered his head and hummed a nursery rhyme, his long, white fingers gently waving in the air like a conductor in an orchestra. Muskrat Manor, in a dark room. When Mason woke up, he not only felt a sharp pain in the back of his neck, but his whole body ached. He reluctantly opened his eyes, suddenly seeing a dark figure standing beside him. "Fuck," he cursed angrily, but his body moved back very honestly. Mason thought of the scene before he passed out. That's right, before he passed out, he saw that child. Mason's face paled, almost screaming, but suddenly he saw the black figure turn on the light. Click. Beside the bed was his sister Margot. Mason clutched the blanket tightly and breathed a sigh of relief. After temporarily putting aside the horror, he suddenly remembered something. Siddle. Where is Siddle? The fear that could not be dispelled turned into indignation. The anger made his face distort. "She's a naughty little bitch, she dared to hit me." Margot was walking to the table to pour water. When she heard these words, she continued to move her hands without showing any emotion. The corners of her eyes only twitched slightly. The little girl brought the medicine that had been poured over with an indifferent expression. "Didn't you fall down in the cave yourself? Don't blame other people's daughters." Mason swallowed, remembering the strange scene he saw in the cave. He was momentarily scared but still persisted. "Impossible. She hit me." He reached out to touch the sore spot on the back of his neck, but only touched a pile of thick bandages. Margot coldly stuffed medicine into his hand. "Then why did you go into the cave?" "Mason." He thought for a moment, then said in confusion, "Because I saw a child." "No, it was a ghost. That ghost wanted to lure me into the cave and kill me." He growled, but when he saw Margot's indifferent expression, he suddenly realized that these words sounded too retarded. To the point that even if he had experienced it himself, saying it was still nonsense.